"I did not sabotage your mother's car," Luke Bennett said, placing a severed brake line on the glass conference table. "I am the reason she is still alive." No one moved. No one whispered. Even the city traffic 40 floors below seemed to disappear beneath the silence that followed. Luke stood alone at the far end of the boardroom, wearing a faded work jacket with a dark streak of motor oil across one sleeve. Around him sat 12 executives in tailored suits, their faces polished by money caution and the quiet certainty that men like Luke did not belong in rooms like this. On the wall behind them, a security image showed Luke leaning beneath the hood of an old silver Buick. Graham Pierce, the company's chief operating officer, rose slowly from his chair. "You touched the brakes." "I repaired them." "Then why did they fail again?" Luke looked at him without anger. "That is the question you should be asking." 3 sharp voices, 3 accusations, and then the room slowed. Rain tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The air smelled faintly of coffee leather and the cold metal Luke had carried in his pocket all morning. At the head of the table sat Natalie Ellison, the 36-year-old chief executive of Ellison Mobility Group. Her dark blue suit was flawless. Her posture was still, but one hand remained closed around the silver fountain pen her mother had given her years earlier. "My mother is in the hospital," Natalie said. Her voice was controlled, but grief lived beneath every word. "You were the last person to work on her car." Luke nodded once. "Yes, ma'am. And you charged her nothing." "She did not have enough cash." Graham gave a humorless laugh. "How convenient. A struggling mechanic helps a wealthy woman for free, then suddenly appears with evidence of a crime." Luke turned toward him. "I did not know she was wealthy." "You expect us to believe that. I do not need you to believe anything yet." The executives shifted in their chairs. Natalie studied the man before her. He was not nervous. He was not pleading. He looked tired the way men look after carrying too much for too many years, but his eyes remained steady. There was no performance in him, only quiet, only dignity. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Share your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe kindness still matters even when no one is watching, please like this video and subscribe. These stories remind us that truth, grace, and second chances can still change a life." Now, back to Luke Bennett. Natalie pointed toward the damaged brake line. "Where did you get that? Your mother's Buick." "The police searched the vehicle." "They searched what was left after someone replaced the original part." Graham's expression tightened for less than a second, but Luke saw it. Mechanics learn to notice small things: a trembling belt, a loose wire, a sound that did not belong. Luke reached into his jacket and placed a second object beside the brake line, a small plastic clip marked with a faded manufacturing code. "This part was recalled 7 years ago," he said. "Ellison Mobility never used it." Natalie leaned forward. "Then how did it get into my mother's car?" Luke looked across the table, not at Natalie, but at Graham. "Someone inside this company put it there." The silence returned heavier than before. 3 days earlier, Luke Bennett had never heard of Natalie Ellison. He had been standing inside a failing garage counting the last dollars in his cash drawer when an elderly woman drove through the rain with smoke rising from beneath the hood of her Buick. She had no idea that the poor single father who fixed her car for free was about to uncover a secret worth millions, and Luke had no idea that helping her would make him the most dangerous man in the room. Luke had woken before sunrise that morning to the soft rattle of rain against the kitchen window. The small apartment behind Bennett Auto Repair was cold enough for him to see his breath when he crossed the worn linoleum floor. He turned on the stove, warmed 2 slices of bread in a skillet, and packed a peanut butter sandwich into a paper bag decorated with blue stars. "You burned it again," Sadie said from the doorway. Luke glanced at the toast. "That is not burnt. It is black." "That is extra flavor." Sadie smiled, and for a moment the room felt warmer. She was 9 years old, with her mother's patient eyes and Luke's habit of noticing what other people try to hide. She sat at the table wearing a red sweater that had become too short at the wrists, and Luke made a quiet note to find another one before winter. On the counter lay 3 unopened bills, a final notice from the electric company and a letter from the bank warning that the garage could be seized if he missed another payment. Luke folded the letter and slipped it beneath a stack of repair manuals before Sadie could see it. He had spent most of his adult life fixing what other people had given up on: engines, transmissions, broken heaters in the middle of January. But some things did not come with diagrams. 7 years earlier, Luke had worked as a quality inspection technician at a large automotive plant outside Detroit. He had earned a steady paycheck, carried a company badge, and believed hard work could keep a family safe. Then his wife Rachel became ill. Luke used every vacation day, sold his truck, and eventually left the plant to care for her. He never regretted choosing her. He only regretted that love had not been enough to save her. After breakfast, Luke walked Sadie through the connecting door into the garage. Fluorescent lights flickered above 3 empty service bays, and the air carried the familiar smell of motor oil, cold steel, and old coffee. A faded sign near the entrance read, "Honest work at a fair price." Rachel had painted those words herself. Sadie placed her backpack beside the office desk, then pulled a glass jar from beneath it. Inside were coins, folded dollar bills, and a handwritten label that said, "Save Dad's Garage." Luke stopped. "Where did that come from?" "I have been saving." "For what?" "So the bank cannot take this place." Luke knelt beside her. "That is not your job, sweetheart. It is our garage." The rain softened outside. Somewhere in the back room, an old wall clock ticked with painful patience. Luke looked at the jar, then at his daughter's serious face, and felt the weight of every promise he had made beside Rachel's hospital bed. He reached into his pocket, found his last quarter, and dropped it into the jar. "Then we are partners," he said. By late afternoon, no customers had come. Luke turned off 2 rows of lights to save electricity and began lowering the front door. That was when an old silver Buick rolled into the lot, coughing smoke from beneath its hood. It stopped 10 feet from the garage. The driver's door opened, and an elderly woman stepped into the rain and pulled a faded wool coat tightly around her shoulders. Luke raised the garage door again before she could take 3 steps. "Stay there," he called. "The pavement is slick." "I can manage." "I know, let me help anyway." He crossed the lot with an umbrella guiding her beneath it, while smoke curled from the Buick's hood and vanished into the gray afternoon. Up close, Luke noticed that she carried herself with unusual confidence, even in worn shoes and a coat that had seen many winters. Her silver hair was pinned neatly behind her ears, and her clear blue eyes studied the garage as though every cracked window and rusted tool cabinet mattered. "Ruth," she said when he asked her name. "Ruth Ellison." "Luke Bennett." He opened the office door for her. "My daughter is inside. She will keep you warm." Sadie looked up from her homework as they entered. Without being asked, she pushed the office heater closer to Ruth and poured hot chocolate from the dented thermos Luke kept near the desk. "It is not fancy," Sadie said, offering her the cup, "but Dad says warm is warm." Ruth smiled. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "Only about cars." Luke heard them laughing as he lifted the Buick's hood. The engine had overheated, but the problem was more than a cracked hose. The ignition assembly had been installed incorrectly, and one clamp near the brake line was newer than everything around it. Luke leaned closer beneath the work light. The rubber line carried a narrow cut too clean and too straight to have come from ordinary wear. He touched it with one gloved finger. The cut had not opened fully, but another hard stop could have caused a complete loss of pressure. Luke removed the damaged section and set it beside his tools. Then he found a second problem, a small plastic clip bearing a faded manufacturing code he had not seen in years. His expression changed. "Something wrong?" Ruth called from the office. Luke looked toward her, then back at the part. "Your car has several problems. I can fix enough to make it safe tonight, but you should not drive it far until I inspect the entire system. I only need to get home. Then I will make sure you do." He worked until the rain became a soft whisper on the metal roof. Wrenches clicked. The heater hummed. Sadie read aloud from a library book while Ruth listened with a kindness that made the empty garage feel almost full. Nearly 2 hours later, Luke lowered the hood and wiped his hands on a rag. "It will get you home safely," he said. Ruth opened her purse and counted several bills. Her face tightened. "I do not have enough." Luke closed her hand around the money. "Keep it. Mr. Bennett, you spent half the evening repairing my car. You spent half the afternoon standing in the rain. Everyone owes something. Just help the next person who needs it." Ruth studied him for a long moment. Men had offered her favors before, but almost always after learning her last name, her family, or the value of what she controlled. Luke knew none of those things. He only knew she had been cold-stranded and afraid. That was enough. As Ruth prepared to leave, she noticed the damaged brake line on the workbench, and while Luke helped Sadie gather her books, she quietly slipped one severed piece into her coat pocket. She didn't know Luke had already placed the matching section and the recalled clip inside a labeled evidence bag. The Buick pulled away beneath the streetlights, leaving Luke and Sadie alone in the quiet garage. Luke watched the red taillights disappear into the rain, unaware that before the next morning ended, Ruth Ellison would be in a hospital and her daughter would be searching for the last man who had touched that car. The phone rang at 8:14 the next morning, just as Luke was pouring coffee into a chipped blue mug. Sadie sat near the office heater finishing a spelling worksheet while rainwater slipped down the garage windows in silver lines. Luke answered without looking at the screen. "Bennett Auto Repair." A woman's voice came through, calm enough to sound dangerous. "Is this Luke Bennett?" "Yes." "My name is Natalie Ellison. You worked on my mother's Buick last night." Luke set down the mug. "Is Ruth all right?" There was a pause, brief but heavy. "My mother was taken to St. Matthew's Hospital this morning." Sadie looked up. Luke turned away from her. "What happened?" "Her brakes failed less than 2 miles from her house." "That is not possible." "You were the last person who touched that system." 3 sentences, sharp and fast, and then silence filled the garage. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the service bay, cooling metal ticked beneath the hood of an unfinished pickup. Luke could hear Natalie breathing through the phone, controlled but uneven, as though anger were the only thing keeping fear from entering her voice. "I replaced a damaged section," he said. "I tested the pressure twice. The brakes were holding when she left." "Then explain why they failed." "I cannot explain it without seeing the car." "You will have that opportunity." Luke glanced through the office window and saw a black sedan pull into the lot, polished enough to reflect the faded Bennett Auto Repair sign above the door. A man in a charcoal overcoat stepped out and opened an umbrella. "There is someone outside," Luke said. "He will bring you to our headquarters." "I have work here." "You have questions to answer here." Natalie ended the call. Sadie watched Luke place the receiver down. "Is the lady from yesterday hurt?" "She's in the hospital because of the car." Luke looked toward the workbench where the labeled evidence bag rested beneath a folded shop towel. "That is what they think." Sadie's face tightened. "Do they think you did something bad?" Luke crossed the office and knelt in front of her. He straightened the collar of her sweater the way he did every morning before school. "People have a right to be afraid when someone they love gets hurt, but they do not have a right to blame you." "No, no," he said gently. "And they do not have a right to change the truth." The man from the sedan entered without knocking. He introduced himself as Daniel Mercer, corporate security for Ellison Mobility Group. His eyes moved across the empty service bays, the overdue notice half hidden beneath the repair manuals, and the glass jar labeled "Save Dad's Garage." He did not comment on any of it. "Mr. Bennett, Ms. Ellison expects you immediately." Luke picked up the evidence bag and slipped it into the inside pocket of his work jacket. He asked the owner of the diner next door to watch Sadie until he returned, then followed Mercer into the rain. 40 minutes later, the sedan stopped beneath a glass tower in downtown Detroit. Luke stepped into a lobby of marble floors, silent elevators, and people who looked at the oil on his sleeves before they looked at his face. On the 42nd floor, Natalie Ellison waited beside a conference table. A paused security video glowed on the wall behind her, showing Luke bending beneath Ruth's Buick, his hand reaching toward the brake line. "This footage came from the camera across from your garage," Natalie said. Graham Pierce stood beside her with a folder pressed against his chest. "It clearly shows you opening the braking system." Luke studied the image. The angle was distant. The timestamp skipped forward. 17 minutes were missing. He reached into his jacket, but Graham raised one hand. "Before you produce whatever story you prepared, understand that this company has attorneys, investigators, and resources you cannot imagine." Luke placed the evidence bag on the glass table anyway. "Then imagine why someone removed 17 minutes from your video." The evidence bag landed softly, but the sound seemed to travel through the entire room. Inside lay the severed section of brake line and the faded plastic clip Luke had removed from Ruth's Buick. Natalie did not reach for it. Graham did. "Do not touch that," Luke said. Graham stopped. "You are in no position to give orders. Evidence does not care about position." Natalie raised her hand, and the room fell quiet again. She looked at Luke with the controlled patience of someone accustomed to receiving answers before she had to ask twice. "Start from the beginning." Luke explained the damaged ignition assembly, the incorrect clamp, and the cut along the brake line. He spoke without drama, using the plain language of a man who had spent years translating mechanical failure into consequences people could understand. The cut was clean, he said. Road damage tears rubber unevenly. Age creates cracks. This was made by a tool. Graham opened the folder in front of him. Interesting theory. Unfortunately, we found a purchase record showing that Mr. Bennett bought a professional line cutter 2 months ago. He slid a printed receipt across the table. Natalie read it, then looked up. Did you buy this? Yes. Why? Because I repair brake lines. Graham gave a small smile. How fortunate. Luke did not react. He looked instead at the security image on the wall. Where was the Buick taken after it left my garage? To Mrs. Ellison's residence, Graham replied. Where exactly? The private garage. Who had access? Graham's smile faded. Household staff, security, personnel, family. Luke turned to Natalie. And who collected the vehicle after the failure? Our internal response team. Who supervises that team? Natalie's eyes shifted toward Graham. No one answered. Rain moved down the windows in long gray trails. The heating system breathed quietly through hidden vents. Luke could smell polished wood, expensive coffee, and the faint rubber odor escaping from the evidence bag. He pointed toward the video. The timestamp jumps from 7:43 to 8 o'clock. 17 minutes are missing. Graham closed the folder. A technical error. Then provide the original file. Our investigators are handling it. Your investigators report to you. The room tightened. Natalie leaned back slowly, studying both men. Mr. Bennett, are you accusing my chief operating officer of tampering with evidence? I am asking why the evidence changes every time it passes through his hands. Graham stepped forward. This is absurd. He is trying to turn suspicion away from himself. Then answer the questions. I do not answer to a roadside mechanic. Luke's voice remained low. That is your mistake. You think the truth changes depending on who notices it. For the first time, Natalie's expression shifted. Not trust, not yet, but something closer to doubt. Luke removed the faded clip from the bag and turned it beneath the conference room lights. This component was recalled 7 years ago because heat caused it to lose tension. Ellison Mobility did not manufacture it, but one of your suppliers did. Graham folded his arms. You expect us to believe you recognized a 7-year-old part on site. Luke met Natalie's eyes. I recognized it because I wrote the first safety report. Silence settled over the room. Natalie's pen stopped moving. You worked for Ellison Mobility at the Jefferson Assembly Plant. Yes. There is no Luke Bennett in our quality division records. There was, Luke said, placing both hands on the table, until my reports disappeared and I was told to stop asking why. Then prove it, Natalie said. Luke held her gaze. Give me one current production vehicle in 30 minutes. Graham stepped between them. Absolutely not. Why? Luke asked. Because he is not certified to touch company property, Graham said. He is a mechanic from a failing garage. And yet he recognized a recalled component your entire technical team missed, Natalie replied. Before Graham could answer, the conference room doors opened. Ruth Ellison entered with a hospital bracelet around her wrist and a gray coat draped over her shoulders, a security officer following several steps behind, looking defeated. Mother, you should be resting. I have rested long enough while men in expensive suits decided what happened to my car. Ruth walked to the table and placed the severed piece of brake line from her coat pocket beside Luke's evidence bag. The two sections matched. Mr. Bennett told me not to drive far, she said. He also told me someone had tampered with the system. Graham's jaw tightened. Mrs. Ellison, you were under stress. Your memory may not be reliable. Ruth turned toward him. My age does not make me confused, Graham. It only makes me less patient. Natalie looked from her mother to Luke, then toward the company test facility visible through the rain beyond the tower. Prepare a vehicle, she said. 40 minutes later, Luke stood beside a silver Ellison Meridian on the private proving ground outside Detroit. Cold wind moved across the open pavement, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and exhaust. Engineers gathered beneath a covered observation platform while Graham spoke quietly into his phone. Luke opened the hood, checked the hydraulic lines, and found the same faded clip hidden beneath a newer housing. This should not be here, he said. Natalie folded her arms. Can you demonstrate the failure, though not safely, from outside? Then I am coming with you. That is unnecessary. It is my company. Inside that car, titles will not matter. Natalie opened the passenger door. Then drive. The Meridian moved onto the test track at 30 miles an hour. Rain tapped gently against the windshield. Luke listened to the engine, felt the steering wheel, and pressed the brake pedal twice, firm, then soft. They approached the long straightaway. "The pressure is dropping," he said. "How quickly? Too quickly. Can you stop? Fasten your seatbelt." Natalie pulled the belt tight. Luke increased the distance from the barrier, shifted the transmission into a lower gear, and pressed the pedal again. It sank toward the floor. "The brakes are not responding. Keep your shoulders back." He engaged the parking brake in careful pulses, allowing the tires to slow without locking. The car drifted toward the gravel safety lane. Rain streaked across the glass. The warning alarm chimed. Luke kept both hands steady, guiding the Meridian into the wide sand runoff until the vehicle rolled to a quiet stop. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The engine idled softly. Natalie's breath came quickly, but Luke was already checking her seatbelt and scanning her face. "Are you hurt? No? Any pain in your neck or shoulders?" "I said I am fine." Only then did she notice the red mark across his palm where the parking brake handle had torn the skin. "Your hand." Luke covered it with a shop cloth. "It will heal." Engineers rushed toward the vehicle, but Natalie remained seated. All her life, people had protected her because of her name, her position, or what she could give them. Luke Bennett had just protected her without asking for anything, and he had done the same for Ruth. "You knew this would happen," she whispered. "I suspected it." "And you still got inside." Luke looked through the windshield at Graham standing beneath the observation roof. "Someone had to make sure you finally believed it." Natalie followed his gaze, and for the first time she saw fear on Graham Pierce's face. Natalie stepped out of the Meridian and faced the engineers gathering around the disabled car. "Seal every component," she said. "No one removes anything without my written approval." Graham approached with his phone still in his hand. "Natalie, we should discuss this privately." "We will. There are investors arriving in less than an hour." "Then they can wait." Luke climbed from the driver's seat, wrapped his injured palm, and walked toward the open hood. Beneath the brake reservoir, he found a supplier mark partially hidden under fresh black paint. He scraped the surface gently with a key. 3 letters appeared. PRT, Pierce Regional Technologies. Luke looked at Graham. "Your family owns the supplier." "My brother owns several manufacturing companies. One of them sold Ellison Mobility defective parts." "That is an accusation." "No," Luke said. "This is a part number." The wind moved across the track, rattling the metal roof above them. Natalie stared at the supplier mark, and something colder than anger entered her face. For one quiet moment, Luke believed the truth had finally become too clear to bury. He was wrong. By noon, Graham had called an emergency meeting with the board. By 1 o'clock, a shortened security video appeared online showing Luke working beneath Ruth's Buick, followed by images of the failed brakes. The missing 17 minutes were never mentioned. The headline called him a desperate mechanic seeking a corporate payout. At 2:15, Luke received a message from his landlord informing him that Ellison Mobility had suspended every fleet repair contract connected to Bennett Auto Repair. At 3, a county family services representative called to ask whether Sadie was living in a financially unstable workplace. Graham had not attacked Luke's evidence. He had attacked everything Luke was trying to protect. Natalie found Luke in the executive hallway, standing beneath lights too bright to feel warm. "The board wants you removed from the property," she said. "And what do you want?" "I need time. My daughter does not have time for strangers to question whether she is safe with me." "I did not authorize that." "But you are allowing the people who did." Natalie lowered her voice. "If I challenge Graham publicly without complete documentation, the board can remove me before I secure the records." "So you are choosing the company. I am trying to save it. From the man who nearly killed your mother, or from the mechanic who noticed—" Her eyes hardened. "Do not make this simpler than it is." Yeah. Luke looked through the glass wall into the boardroom where Graham stood smiling beside men who had already decided what poverty looked like and what truth should cost. "I do not need you to trust me because you know my name," Luke said. "Then why should I trust you?" "Because cars do not lie." He placed his visitor badge in her hand and walked away. Near the elevator, Sadie waited beside Ruth, holding the glass jar marked "Save Dad's Garage" against her chest. When she saw Luke, she ran to him. "Are we losing it?" she asked. Luke knelt despite the executives watching. "We may lose the building." "Is that the same thing?" He looked at Rachel's painted sign reflected faintly in the polished wall. "No, sweetheart, a garage is not the walls, it is the promise inside them." Sadie took his wrapped hand carefully, and together they entered the elevator. Natalie watched the doors close. Graham had given her away to protect her position, but the little girl's frightened eyes made the price suddenly impossible to ignore. Then Ruth stepped beside her and placed a small memory card in her palm. "Your father taught you how to lead a company," she said. "Now decide whether he taught you how to recognize a good man." "What is on this?" Natalie asked. Ruth looked through the glass wall toward Graham, who was laughing quietly with two board members. The truth he assumed an old woman would never understand. 20 minutes later, Natalie sat alone in her office with the blinds drawn and inserted the card into her computer. The first file came from the Buick's dashboard camera. It showed the car parked inside Ruth's private garage after Luke had repaired it. At 11:42 that night, the garage door opened. A man wearing an Ellison Mobility service jacket approached the vehicle, lifted the hood, and remained there for 17 minutes, undoing the repair Luke had made and installing the recalled part in its place. His face stayed outside the camera's view, but the identification badge clipped to his belt was clear. The employee worked for Pierce Regional Technologies. The second file was an audio recording. Graham's voice filled the office. "Sign the voting transfer, Ruth. You are no longer in a position to protect this company," Ruth answered calmly. "And if I refuse, then the board will decide you are no longer competent to make that choice." Natalie listened twice. On the third time, she stopped hearing a trusted executive and began hearing the machinery of betrayal. The following morning, the board gathered to approve the sale of Ellison Mobility. Graham stood near the screen with a prepared statement blaming Luke for the brake failures, the negative publicity, and the collapse in investor confidence. "Mr. Bennett exploited Mrs. Ellison's vulnerability," he said. "He created a crisis, then presented himself as the solution." The doors opened behind him. Ruth entered first. Luke followed, wearing the same faded work jacket with Sadie holding his uninjured hand. Graham's confidence faltered. "They are not authorized to be here." Natalie rose from her chair. "They are here at my request." "Natalie, this meeting concerns the survival of the company." "Exactly." Ruth placed a brown paper bag on the table. From it, she removed the original brake line, the recalled clip, and Luke's inspection notes. Luke added an old black notebook bearing the faded emblem of the Jefferson assembly plant. Page after page contained dates, component codes, pressure readings, and warnings he had filed 7 years earlier. Each warning matched a defect found in the current vehicles. Graham shook his head. "Handwritten notes prove nothing." "Then perhaps the company records will," Natalie said. The screen behind him changed. Purchase orders appeared showing millions of dollars paid to Pierce Regional Technologies for unapproved parts. Then came the missing video. Then the recording. Graham's own voice settled over the boardroom, and no one interrupted it. No one looked away. When the audio ended, Natalie faced the directors. "The man you called an opportunist repaired my mother's car without asking who she was." She looked at Luke. "The man you called a liar risked his own safety to prove our vehicles were defective." Then she turned to Graham. "And the man we paid to protect this company tried to bury the truth beneath contracts, threats, and a child's fear." Corporate security entered quietly. Graham opened his mouth, but no defense came. For the first time, the polished boardroom had nothing to offer him. No title, no applause, no place to hide. As he was escorted out, the room remained completely silent. Luke did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply knelt beside Sadie as she whispered, "Do they believe you now?" Luke looked at the executives who had once refused to see him. "They believe the evidence." Ruth rested a hand on his shoulder. "No," she said softly. "They finally understand the man who protected it." The silence in the boardroom did not break when Graham Pierce was escorted away. It changed. The room no longer belonged to titles, polished shoes, or people who believed power made them untouchable. It belonged to the truth. In the weeks that followed, Ellison Mobility recalled the affected vehicles, reopened Luke's original safety reports, and created a compensation fund for customers whose trust had been put at risk. Graham and several associates faced formal investigation, while the board released a public statement clearing Luke's name. The same news stations that had called him desperate now described him as the mechanic who protected thousands of families. Luke watched none of the interviews. He had a broken heater to replace 2 oil changes waiting and a daughter who still needed help with multiplication. One cold Thursday morning, his phone rang again. Natalie's name appeared on the screen. Luke let it ring twice before answering. Bennett Auto Repair. Are you always this formal? She asked. Only with chief executive officers. Then come outside. Luke looked through the office window. Natalie stood in front of the garage beside Ruth, both of them holding paper coffee cups. No black sedan waited at the curb. No security officer followed them. Natalie wore a simple gray coat and the wind had loosened a strand of hair across her face. Luke stepped outside. Is the Buick broken again? Not this time, Ruth said. My daughter is. Natalie gave her mother a patient look, then held out a folder. Inside was a contract offering Luke leadership of a new independent vehicle safety division. The position came with a fair salary, full authority to stop production over safety concerns, and funding to preserve Bennett Auto Repair exactly where it stood. Luke read every page. You do not need to decide today, Natalie said. I already did. Her face fell slightly. You were turning it down. Luke removed a pen from his pocket and wrote one sentence beneath the final clause. One day, every month, this garage repairs cars for seniors and struggling families at no charge. Natalie read it, then looked at him. That could cost the company money. Doing the right thing usually costs something, Ruth smiled. Natalie signed beneath his sentence. Months later, the garage looked almost the same. Rachel's faded sign still hung above the entrance. The old wall clock still ran 3 minutes slow. But the heater worked, the bills were paid, and the glass jar labeled Save Dad's Garage now held flowers instead of coins. Sadie sat on a stool while Ruth helped her paint a small wooden sign that read, Kindness is always in stock. Nearby, Natalie struggled to loosen an oil filter while Luke watched with quiet amusement. You said this was easy, she said. I said it was simple. That is not the same thing. You are learning. She finally loosened it and looked up, smiling with a warmth no boardroom had ever given her. Luke smiled back. There was no grand promise, no expensive celebration, and no moment that needed applause. Just coffee cooling on a workbench. Rain tapping softly against the windows and 3 lives slowly becoming a family through grace, respect, and second chances. Some miracles arrive with flashing lights and public praise. Others begin when a tired man sees a stranger in the rain and chooses kindness before he knows her name. Tell us in the comments what moment moved you most and whether you believe Luke was right to give Natalie a second chance. If this story reminded you that honest work still matters, please like and subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Thank you for watching all the way to the end.